Each woman I meet, each woman I coach, and each woman I interview greatly blesses me. Meet Annette. Annette is a friend and a client who stepped forward and launched her coaching business online. She is an amazing woman, an author, a marriage mentor leader at church, and a marriage and mental health coach who turned her own pain into great purpose. From marriage to divorce, through depression to remarriage, and what God taught her along the way, Annette shares her story, her diagnosis of bipolar disorder, and a suicide attempt at midlife. You won't want to miss this episode, so grab those headphones and a notebook and listen in. Let's step forward. Welcome to Step Forward with Terry Mullen. If you're new here, welcome. If you have been following along for a while, welcome back, and thank you so much for being here. I'm a mom to 4 adults, a wife of 34 years, a midlife entrepreneur, and your confidence coach who transformed my own doubt into confidence to speak, write my book, start a podcast, and launch my own business. Now I empower other amazing women just like you to do the same. So lean in and learn how to crush that fear, amplify your voice, and build confidence to create your own impact and income. I'm here to encourage you and empower you every step of the way. Let's step forward. Well, thank you so much for being here, everyone. I am so excited to introduce you to my guest today. She is a good friend and a marriage and mental health coach. Her name is Annette Newcomb. She and her husband, Adam, actually have a ministry at our church called Marriage Mentoring, and they have had just a significant impact on marriages and helping restore marriages. Annette saw kind of a need after COVID, especially where people just really needed some support. And so we've been able to get involved with that with them, and we have become good friends as a result. Annette has also been coaching for 5 years, but now she's decided to do it online, and I've been able to help her step forward with that and do it. And so I'm just excited for you all to meet her and hear her story. She has a powerful story. So thank you, my good friend. Thank you, Annette, for being here today. Welcome.
I'm so excited to be here with you. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Well, let's talk a little bit about some of this because you have an amazing story. You and Adam have this amazing story about your marriage journey and how you help other couples as a result of that. I find that sometimes we go through these hard things, and then those things we go through really allow us to propel forward and help others. And you saw a need, and you and Adam have risen up and met that need for others. But share a little bit about your story and what got you first interested in coaching and then leading this ministry at church. Share a little bit about your story, kind of how all this came about.
Well, I will do it in a very nutshell way because it would take me a long time to go through the entire story. And as you know, I did write a book about it, which we could talk about later. But so my husband and I were married for 26 years. And the latter part of those years, probably a good significant 15 to 20 of those years, were very difficult, and for a number of reasons. And I had begged him really for a long time, said, we need to go to counseling. We need to get some help. And his response was always, I don't need to counseling. There's nothing wrong with me. If you need to go, you go. But, and that was always the response, kind of a typical Christian male type of response. If there's something that seems wrong with me, that means that I don't have my act all together. When I go to church, somebody asks me, how are we? Oh, we're great. And, I'm sitting there cringing in the background going, no, we're not great. But of course, you always want to put on that facade every time you walk into the doors that everything is wonderful when, because otherwise it shows a sign of weakness or something's wrong in your relationship with the Lord. And so that's how he was portraying himself for a good many years. Finally, at year 26, I couldn't do it anymore. And things kind of came to a head for a variety of reasons. And I just said, that's it. I said, if you're not willing to go to counseling, then we can't do this anymore. And there was some verbal abuse, emotional abuse, a lot of things like that going on. And he just wouldn't do it. And I just said, then that's it. Then we're going to separate. And unbeknownst to me at that time, we didn't find this out till years later, but the events leading up to that separation, which are more involved than I have time to talk to right now, it triggered in me, those events were traumatic enough to trigger in me a bipolar disorder, which I had no clue about. Bipolar disorder is something that you're genetically predisposed to have, and it doesn't manifest itself until you have some sort of triggering event. And for me, it was the events that led up to our separation. So you would think that it would send you into the depressive phase of that bipolar, being way up or way down. But instead, I went very manic that whole summer. And this was the beginning of the summer of 2011. And I started making very rash decisions, which you do in a very manic phase. And I just filed for divorce. I said, this is it. We're not doing this anymore, which if I hadn't been in that phase, I probably not would have done. I would have just said, let's just separate. Let's try and figure this out. But instead, I just filed for divorce. But for him and for in our situation, I think that was a real wake up call for him.
Yeah.
And he was like, wow, she's like really serious. She's not going to, put up with this anymore, because I had been a very enabling person. I had put up with this behavior for years and years and years and tried to be the quote, good, submissive wife, and which we tend to do.
Right.
And that was his wake up call. And so for him, he, unbeknownst to me, even though he said he wasn't going to go to counseling, and I'd served in these divorce papers, he went to counseling on his own and started dealing with all of the issues that were leading to mostly anger that he hadn't processed with for years and years and years, that kept growing kind of like a cancer in our family. So to make a long story short, we did actually go through with their divorce. We got divorced the end of September 2011. My bipolar disorder got worse. I went through a very horrible depressive stage to the point that I was suicidal.
Right.
And my poor husband is dealing with all of this all through this time. But we decided that we were going to try and reconcile. And God did amazing things. And he allowed us to get to the point through counseling, through this wonderful counselor that we went to, Christian counselor, allowed us to put the past behind us and move forward. And a year, almost to the day that our divorce was final, we remarried in 2012. So we've now, this December, will have been remarried 12 years.
Wow.
So whenever we say how long, people go, oh, how long have you been married? And we just had our anniversary this month in August. And we say, 39 years. And we always say -1. We almost think we should just get credit for that whole year, but we always have to say -1 because we were divorced that one year. But it's just because of going through that entire process, it just gave us a real passion to come alongside other couples and say, okay, if we can get through the things that we went through, then you can get through what you're going through. And we want to come alongside you and say, how can we help you in this process? And even if we just came alongside you just to pray with you as you were going through this, if that's all we did, that in itself would be powerful enough. But let's also get some training behind us. Let's get some resources behind us and say, okay, how can we walk beside you and help you through this process so that you don't have to experience that?
Yeah.
And that's what gave us the passion to be involved in marriage mentoring ministry at the church. And at this point now leading it and training other couples like you and Scott and other couples to come alongside couples and say, let's, and some couples aren't as severe as what we went through. Some are.
Right.
And some just need a little pick me up and say, hey, we're just kind of going through this thing. We just need another set of eyes to look at what we're going through. And you just kind of go, and then they go, oh, that's what we need to do. And it's kind of simple. Not everybody is in crisis, but some people are. And so we have a huge range of what people come to us for that they're needing help for. But that came out of our own experience, that we saw the Lord just do miracle after miracle in what we were going through. Because at the time that we got divorced, if you would have told me that I would end up back reconciled with him, I would have told you were nuts, because I just looked at him like, I don't have anything to do with him ever again. We will be co-parents and that will be the end of it. But we are never going to be back together again. And the Lord had other plans. And he knew that he was going to take what was a complete failure and use it for his glory and use it to help other people and use it to minister to other people. And that is an incredibly humbling and amazing thing that every day I just go, I can't believe you did that. Right. This is what you're doing on a regular basis. But that's how he works. That's what he does.
Yeah.
So it's been an incredible journey.
And I think what's really interesting to me knowing you the way I do, to hear you even talk about these manic episodes, which we've talked about a little bit more, kind of the behavior, what happened.
Right.
I know I see you now just so organized and so
Mm-hmm.
disciplined and so structured and so even keel, really
Mm-hmm.
stable. So I think you've even shared with me that was a really scary time for you too, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because that came kind of out of left field. You shared that
Right.
you guys you've already gone through some really hard things, went through some
Right.
difficulties financially, other things, and then here comes this manic stuff with you and the
Right.
divorce, and that was hard to deal with, wasn't it? Like it was shocking in a
Yes.
way.
Yes. And when we finally figured out that it was bipolar disorder, because what's so unfortunate is when people go through very real lows and you're suicidal in the depressive part of it, people think, oh, well, you're just really depressed. And so they treat your depression,
Right.
but that's not enough when you're actually bipolar. You have to treat with certain medications the unstableness of being manic and depressive. And so after a few years, when my husband saw this cycle of being way up and then being way low, he finally kind of confronted me because he had worked as a probation officer for many years. He was retired from that and he had seen people in this situation. So he'd had a little bit of experience with it. And he came to me one day and he said, I think you're bipolar. And I was so mad at him because I was actually in a manic phase. I was like, I can't believe you're just not happy for me, that I'm not depressed. Why can't you just be happy for me? But he goes, no, he goes, you need to listen to me. I really think that you're bipolar. Well, my particular illness was seasonal. I would be very manic in the spring and the summer. And then as soon as the fall would hit, I could feel it coming like a tidal wave. I would just sense this depression coming on and it would get so dark and so deep. And this was the end of the summer. He was telling me this, and I'm not kidding you. Within a few weeks later, I started to feel this wave of depression coming, and I was like, oh my gosh, he's right. And I was so angry at God for a couple of weeks. I just screamed and yelled at him and I was like, really? I was like, really? After all the things that we've been through, I was a cancer survivor. We've been through so
Right.
many financial ups and downs, and we'd been through this divorce and we'd gotten on the other side of it and all of these things. And I was like, really? Like, now you're going to label me with this, and this is something I'm going to have to live with for the rest of my life. And I was so angry at him. And then I wrestled with it for a good like couple of weeks. And then it was just like he brought this. I can't really explain it other than to say it was just kind of this calming peace that just said, okay, Lord, I just surrendered to it. And I said, if that's what you want me to have and to deal with, I know that you knit me together in my mother's womb. I know this is something that you genetically gave me to have. Then the only reason I know that you did this is for me to be able to help other people and give a voice to it and try and give understanding to it. And so I said, okay, then I guess that's what you want me to do. And from
Yeah.
that point on, I've been amazed at the number of people that he has brought across my path that have dealt with this in some way, shape, or form, or a family member that I've been able to sit with and talk to. And they've been so incredibly thankful and grateful to be able to have somebody that have some sort of understanding
Yeah.
and also be able to give voice to it in a faith-based kind of way to say, there's nothing wrong with your faith. There's nothing wrong with you in a sense that you don't need to be praying harder. You don't need to be reading more certain scripture. This is an illness that you're dealing with. We don't look at what's down on somebody if they have a broken leg. Why do we look down on them if they have a broken mind? Why do we
Right.
look at that differently in any way, shape, or form? You
Right.
wouldn't walk up to somebody who's wearing glasses and say, why do you wear glasses? Where's your faith?
Right.
We wouldn't do that.
Right.
Hey, if somebody has an illness of some sort, we don't look down on their faith because they have diabetes or they have heart disease. And yet, if someone is struggling with some sort of brain health illness, we treat it completely differently.
Right.
So I became very passionate about trying to educate people, especially in the faith community, to say we need to realize that for some people, not everybody, but for some people, when they're struggling with something, this is a very real illness that needs to be treated and looked on that way and not looked down on them.
Right.
For some people, if they're dealing with a depression or something like that, it could be because they're on social media too much or because
Right.
they're not getting enough exercise or sleep, or could be a whole myriad of, reasons. They don't necessarily need to treat it with medication. That's one of the issues too. There's a whole gamut of reasons why someone may be dealing with something mentally in their brain. But for some people, it's a real illness, and we need to give people the grace to feel okay
Right.
about realizing that they might need to treat that and that it's
Right.
okay. Because if I hadn't done that, I would not have been able for the past 10 years to be living a completely stable and level and quote unquote normal life, because I'm getting the medication, the chemical that's helping to make my brain stay balanced to function in a normal way. And for that, I'm incredibly grateful.
Yeah. I think what's so great, there are a couple things that come to my mind when you're talking. First of all, just that you are able to be a voice, especially within the Christian community, because there's always so much shame, like you've talked about, that can kind of come with some of this, not only divorce, but then also like the mental
Right.
health component. And since COVID, we all know that this is on the rise. And I think what's amazing is that you really can be a voice, and you are a safe place for people to land, to have these
Mm-hmm.
discussions and to help them move
Mm-hmm.
forward with their life. One of the things I also want to mention is that I think what's really great is that because you've had this experience, you, like you said, give voice and give light to it, but then also you know how to direct people that need support, need additional
Mm-hmm.
support. Like when people come into the marriage mentoring in particular, or even in your coaching,
Mm-hmm.
you're there to support and offer help and guidance. But if it goes beyond your scope of what you
Right.
do, you have resources that really help refer people out.
Right.
And so I think that's really also really powerful. And you take away that
Sure.
shame that somebody might need that, right?
Right. Yeah.
Really,
Mental health coaching is in no way diagnosing anybody or saying, oh,
yes,
I think you have this, you should do this, because
right.
that is obviously outside of my scope
Yeah,
of experience or knowledge or expertise. It's just giving a voice to say it's okay,
right.
that to be able to say, especially I found with men, they feel so like, well, I should be able to handle this. I should be
Right.
able to deal with this on my own, and I should be strong enough to be able to just make this go away. And I'm like, why do you think that?
Yeah.
It's if you're dealing with an illness, could you just make that just go away? Are you strong enough to just make that go away? It's
Yeah.
okay to go and see a doctor and find out, is this
Right.
something that you need, extra help with or not?
Right.
It's okay to make that decision to do that. And
Right.
that's what's helping to bring the education and the clarity and to, help people feel okay about that.
Yeah. And I think it's so powerful. I love it. I love it that you're doing this. And one of the other things I think that's really great, because of the experience you've had and a lot of the coaches that are there in that community at church too, we've all been through really hard things. Like I've
Mm-hmm.
shared in my book as well. We've talked
Mm-hmm.
about this. We went through big crisis in our marriage.
Mm-hmm.
Most of us are there because we know
You're
what
right.
it's like to struggle. So,
Right.
but I think being in the Christian community, like we talked about before, like showing up, everybody wants to show up and put
Mm-hmm.
on their Sunday best. And
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of people that are hurting right now. And I
Mm-hmm.
think, especially in the Christian community, there can be this shame that if you even consider divorce or you have divorced, or not all
Mm-hmm.
marriages work the way we want them to,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I think this has just become such a powerful program that really helps
Mm-hmm.
people up, lift people up at church, and then what you do
Mm-hmm.
one on one. So I'm grateful. You guys are great
Mm-hmm.
leaders. And a couple things. What I wanted to ask you, what do you think changed? You know, you guys took that year off, obviously a wake up call for Adam. But for anyone that's struggling, like not to lose hope, because I want to talk about this, is with the title of your book. I want to talk about this next. But what do you think changed in that time? Because some people might say, oh, really? Can God really do that? You know, what changed that made such a difference for both of you to look at yourselves individually and then to come back together?
I think for me, first, it was two things. When I went to go finish with the divorce process, and you stand for a judge in open court, and so everybody hears all your business as you're standing there. And so he goes up and, how long have you been married? Blah, blah, blah. And he's asking you all these questions and everybody's listening. And so he gets to the point where he says, I see that you filed for irreconcilable differences. So what you're telling me is that you've done everything that you can do in order to make this marriage work or to save this marriage.
Mm-hmm.
And at that moment, it was like I was in a movie, and you know how like time kind of stands still and you have like one voice on one shoulder and one voice on the other shoulder, and one voice is telling me like, are you sure you've really done everything that you can do? And the other voice is telling me, okay, well, you have to say, yes, you've done everything because this is what you're here for. You want him to stamp, all the pages and tell you everything's final and you can move forward. And I knew in my heart that I had not done everything that I could do. But I also knew that that's what I was there for. So I lied and I said, yes, I've done everything that I could do. And he's like, okay, stamps all the papers, goes, okay, to be final in 6 months, next person, moves forward. And so as I continued, in the days that followed, I just felt such conviction from the Lord saying, you haven't done everything that you can do. I know that you told Adam if he wasn't going to go to counseling, that was it. He didn't want to go. But unbeknownst to me, during that process of time, he was going on his own. And he was meeting with the counselor that we had tried to meet together to work on all of these issues. And so at that point in time, we have 3 sons. The 2 oldest ones were out of the house, but we had one that was still in high school. So he would come every once in a while to pick him up and take him out to dinner. And I saw such a change in his demeanor just in the few minutes of interaction that I would have in him, because I saw the Lord working in him. And I was like, wow, he's like really different. Like something's going on with him. And so it was after that, when I met before the judge, the Lord just convicted. It was right before Christmas. And I asked if I could come and see him. And he said yes. And I went to this little place where he was renting this little room, like like a little casita in someone's house. And I said, I feel like the Lord is telling us that we should try and reconcile. And the poor guy, I had been so adamant about that this was never going to happen, that he at that point had gotten to the place where he had resolved himself that this is not going to happen. And he was getting to the place in his own mind that I just need to move on. And then here I come to him. And so he just fell apart. I mean, he would just wept, and we just sat there and held each other for like the longest time, because he's like, I was praying for this and I wanted this to happen, but I was so sure it wasn't going to happen. And so it was just at that point that we just said, okay, this is what we need to do. And so it was God working on me, and it was God working on him. And obviously we took the process very slowly, because we didn't want to just jump in with both feet. We knew that we had a lot of work to do in order to happen. But I think a lot of it was his making the attempt and the willingness to go and work on all of those past hurts and anger issues that he had not processed. And for a lot of men, it's like that. It's like you have something that happens and it makes you really angry or bitter, and you just stuff it and you don't deal with it, and you don't realize it, that it just grows and festers. And for us, it affected everything. It affected his relationship with our boys and our marriage. And he just didn't want to see it. He didn't want to face it. He didn't want to deal with it. And when he finally did and was able to process that and put it behind him, it was a major turning point. And so many times for him, when we were going through all of our difficulties, his thing was, well, I told her I love her today, so that just should cover everything. And I just used to tell him, it doesn't work that way.
Right.
And after we started our reconciliation process, he would come up to me with such sincerity and just like almost weeping and say, I am so sorry for X, Y, or Z. And will you please forgive me? And I would just be like, if you would have just done that over the period of time, leading up to this, we probably would have never gotten to this point. You don't realize how much more weight that carries than you just saying, well, I told her I love her today, so that covers everything, and that makes everything okay. The fact that he recognized what he had done and came to me in all sincerity and asked my forgiveness it was over a long stretch of time. He would look at something and say, I'm so sorry that I did this, that I said this, that I put you through this. Will you please forgive me? And that, just asking for forgiveness for that, just really allowed the past to just go be in the past. And I wasn't holding bitterness or unforgiveness. It allowed us to literally just put the past in the past and start again with a clean slate, because there's so much power in forgiveness and so much power in someone coming to you with a really humble heart, with true repentance and going, I messed up, and please just forgive me, and showing it in their actions and in their spirit. And that just allowed us to move forward.
Yeah.
Well, really
I think what's great too is that not only, but he was able to really own it.
Yes, exactly.
And ask for forgiveness, but then also change the behavior.
Exactly.
Because, now I think you'd be willing to say your marriage is probably better than it's ever been now. Would you agree? And your communication and all that. Just quickly too, one of the things that you said before was that, your marriage can often be like the Titanic,
Right.
And I'll let you
Yes.
describe it because it's a great analogy that it's
Yes.
not the big things, it's all the little things. So
Right.
go ahead and
So
share that. I thought that was
I
really
heard
great.
some, yeah, I heard somebody say once that what sank the Titanic was not a huge, that iceberg when they hit it it didn't leave like this huge gash in the side of the ship and all of a sudden, it filled up with water and it sank.
Right.
They skidded along that iceberg and it created a series of smaller holes along the bottom of that ship. And then slowly but surely, each of those holes filled up with water to the point that it caused that massive ship to literally break in half and sink. And a
Right.
lot of times that's what happens in our marriages. For some people, they have major, events that happen, adultery or, huge, huge things that happen that affect their marriage. But for a lot of us, it's just these small little things that keep building and building and building and growing
Right.
and growing. And before you know it, our whole marriage is flooded and it's literally to the point that the slightest little thing happens and boy, that's just it. We are just broken in half.
Right.
And I think that happens with a lot of marriages.
Yeah.
It's over time, the things that we don't take the time to address.
Correct.
And they just keep growing and festering. And it's also not even just not taking the time to address, but not investing in our
Right.
marriage. I was very guilty of things were bad. And here we had these three boys who I adored. And so I'm like, well, if you're going to be this nasty person over here who's bitter and angry and says mean things, then you just go over there and I'm just going to focus on my boys over here because I know I'm going to get all kinds of emotional deposits in my love bank from them over here. So I'll just focus on them.
Yeah.
So that left me not investing in him very much because he was just an ornery person over here. So you just go over there. And so I was guilty of not investing in that and putting all of my focus and attention on the kids over here, which is completely wrong on my part. And so we all have our things that we need to own up to.
Right.
And so even if it seems like one person is more guilty of, whatever, there's always stuff that it's never 100% one person. There's always other things that we are responsible for that we need to own up to ourselves.
Right. And I share, I that's powerful. I love that analogy. And it's so true that we all have our role. And I've shared with you, as I share in my book, that part of my issue was that I was just such a pleaser, that there was a lot of anger inside me because I would say yes, even though I knew the answer would be no. And it's taken me a long time to, similar situation, to use my voice, to speak up, to say what I meant, not worry about the response. But because I often didn't, because I was such a pleaser, finally when things did fracture, I was like, wow, where have I been? And I had to take responsibility for that I wasn't being fully honest with how I really felt and learn to stand up for myself. So such a powerful story, Annette. I just love so much. I appreciate you being so transparent and sharing. It's hard, but at the same time, if it can help somebody else on the other side, on the other side of this microphone, that they know that they're not alone, that they have a voice, that they can stand up, and it's important.
Yeah, the Lord gave me a really good analogy one time when we were in counseling, and I said, because Adam had I don't mean to speak badly of him because now he's like the hero of the story, but at that time, and he's very good about accepting that. In fact, when we talk about the book, well, I'll say, don't remind me about that because I'll say that. But the analogy that the Lord gave me was, I had been knocked down so many times by him that I said once to the counselor, I feel like I'm in a boxing ring and I'm down for, the 8 count. And I feel like if I get up, I'm just going to get knocked down again. So it's much safer if I just stay down here on the mat because I don't even have the energy to get up again.
Yeah.
And even when I said that, he goes, wow, he goes, can I use that?
It's great. It's a great analogy. I get that.
But that was the image I had in my head. I was like, I don't even have the energy to get up and try and fight with you or argue with you. Or so I'm just going to, and it made me feel so small. And he even to this day, if we're talking with another couple or doing that, he'll start to say, I made my wife feel so small, and he'll get emotional and almost start crying at the thought of that because he knows that was very true of us in our relationship, that he had knocked me down so many times, just verbally, emotionally, in just how he had treated me, that I was just a small shell of the person that I could have been, should have been, because he was so angry in just him and his own life and how it had become. So
And I love it too, just now knowing you guys on the other side of this and seeing how you are. Number one, I always think there's no could haves or should haves, right? I think God used all of that,
Hmm.
all the
Right.
pain,
Exactly.
and, God takes
Exactly.
our pain for a purpose. And you look at
Right.
how many people you can help, both individually, like you do with your coaching,
Right.
with the mental health, or that you can help them as a couple, and
Right.
how powerful it is. And I've seen Adam be super emotional. And so
Right.
it's wonderful to see. Not everybody does that, Annette, right?
Right.
Not everybody
Right.
can get on the other side of that and take responsibility, not only ask for forgiveness, but get on the other side and actually put into action what they're learning,
Right.
which is what he's
Right.
done to change the behavior. And now you guys have
Right.
such a beautiful relationship. So it's just powerful. I love
Mhm.
your story. It's really beautiful. Was there something you wanted to say about the book, or do you want, because
Well, I
the,
was just going to say that when I was writing the manuscript for the book, he was the one that encouraged me to write it.
yeah,
And after it was a couple of years on the other side of getting remarried, and he said, you really need to write this story. And I was like, really? And he was like, yes. And I said, well, if I write this story, you're not going to look very good in it for several chapters. And he was like, no, he goes, if you write it, you have to tell like the whole truth of it. And I
wow.
was like, wow, okay. And so when I got ready to send it, and you have it all typed up and ready to go to the publisher, and then I hit send, and I went, oh my gosh, like it's out there now. Like
Yeah.
the good, the bad, and the ugly of it is like it's out there. And I was so incredibly proud of him, because really, for, like I said, for a couple chapters, he does not look very good in this at all. But once you see, like we just talked about, what he did and how he came to the other side of it, then it's, really powerful. But for him to be willing to be that vulnerable
Yeah.
and that honest, and let me write about how we got to the place that we got. I was so incredibly inspired by him, because that took a lot to be able to
Yes.
be that honest about how we got to the place that we were.
Right. But I love it because our secrets keep us sick, right? So I think for him to
Mhm.
be that open and honest and transparent and allow that pain to help other
Right.
couples is really powerful. And it's probably why this succeeds so well. And every time I talk to you, I'm like, there's just so much wisdom. And so I've heard some of this story before, but then to hear individually how you each grew and then came back together, it's
Hmm.
really beautiful. I want to talk about the book a little bit because you and I both have this in common that we wrote
Hmm.
books, right?
Hmm.
So the title is Hanging On to Hope. And for anyone listening, you can get it on Amazon. It's a beautiful book that Annette has written. It's called From Marriage to Divorce Through Depression to Remarriage and What God Taught Me Along the Way. And I think for you too, if you want to share just briefly, you talked a little bit about not only the things you went through in your marriage, but also then the suicide, right? And I
Hmm.
think that's
Hmm.
probably part, in addition to mentoring and coaching, the mental health and brain health part
Hmm.
is also the other part that's really important, where you
Hmm.
almost gave up on yourself and gave up on life.
Right.
And also a huge problem in our society and world right now. And so I think there's another avenue where you get to be such a voice, especially
Right.
within the Christian church,
Right.
because so many of us cover up those wounds and things that we have felt.
Right.
And I think it's so powerful. And I know I've shared with you in my teens, I felt that way. So, but anyway, if there's anything you want to share about that, but it's beautiful. And you have titled your coaching program after Hanging On to Hope as well, correct?
Yes. Yes. Yeah, I just felt it was important to be really honest about that, and I go into pretty good detail about like how the day that I even tried to do that, and what that day was like and what happened, and that the Lord just spared me from that. And I think now how awful that would have been for my children and my husband, but
Yeah.
the Lord knew, and he knew that he was going to use that. And for a long time, I carried that around as a, like, how could the Lord forgive me for that, for like trying to take my own life? And that was another thing that was hard for me to deal with. But I
Mm-hmm.
also realized I was not in my right mind. Like, nobody in their right mind, you can't be in your right mind and think about ending your life. There's actually, there's obviously something that's not clicking right in that sense. And for me, I was in just the lowest of lows of my bipolar disorder, and had not been diagnosed yet and not on medication. So I came to a point finally, it was probably maybe a few years later, where I actually had a moment, actually in bed with my husband in the morning, where I just had this overwhelming sense of God's grace. I mean, just overwhelming. And I just started crying, like weeping, sobbing. And my husband just laid there and held me. And he was just like, for like 15 minutes. And then finally he's like, okay, do you want to tell me what that was all about? And I said, I just came to realize that God just forgives me for what it was twofold. It was just, I was so incredibly thankful for where God had brought us to, that he and I were just laying there in bed together, and how he had brought us full circle onto the other side of what we had gotten through. And then at the same time, it was like I finally accepted his forgiveness for trying to take my own life. And it was, his grace was so overwhelming that all I could do was just sob. It was just all I could do. I couldn't even process it. All I could do was just lay there and sob. It made me think of Peter after he had denied the Lord. And it talks about that after that happened, he went away and he went and cried, and wept bitterly, it says. Yeah. But there's only one place in scripture in Luke where it says that the Lord looked at him and then he went away and sobbed. And when I looked more into that word, how it says that the Lord looked at him, it says that he stopped and looked intently and gazed at him. And then he went away and wept bitterly. And I have this theory, I don't know if it's true, but I can't wait till I see the Lord and I ask if this is true. And especially now that I've been watching The Chosen, and if any of you have not watched The Chosen, you have to watch it, because it's just the most amazing show. It takes scripture from black and white and makes it into technicolor. And if you've seen the gentleman, Jonathan Rumi, who plays Jesus in the show, he has a way of looking at people with his eyes that you just imagine Christ looking at you that way. And so my theory is that he looked at Peter with such love and such grace, because it wouldn't be in Christ's character to look at him disappointed or how could you have possibly done that? Peter was just so overwhelmed by that. How could you possibly take that in?
Right.
You know what I mean? After what he had just done, that he just went away and wept, because that's your only way you can respond to that. Is just, it's so overwhelming that all you can do is just weep. And that's kind of my theory of why he went away and wept. Not because he was disappointed in himself for what he had done, but because he was so overwhelmed by the love of Christ and his grace that he was offering to him at that moment. Didn't know what to do with it.
It's beautiful. It's a really good visual. I have two thoughts. Number one, and I will put this at the end, but if anyone is experiencing those deep emotions like that, or just shame, or just really struggling personally or in their marriage and need someone to reach out to, I'll definitely put your information in the show notes so people can reach out. I don't ever want anyone to feel alone, especially within the Christian community. It just can be a very heavy burden to carry. So I'll make sure that people can reach out to you. And then on a fun side note, my friend Donna that you met actually had seen Jonathan Rumi in person. And fun. It's super cool. She tells a great story about that. And the burden I think he carries, that people see him as Jesus, and how that has affected him in his personhood.
Yes.
Anyway, that's just incredible. And if anyone, like I said, wants your book, it's on Amazon, but you have such a great story. Moving on to something else, now that you have this ministry, well, the mentorship, it's the ministry, but the mentorship at the church, and now you are stepping forward and doing this coaching online as well as in person. What do you think your top goal going forward, whether that's personally or with your coaching? Maybe that's a hard question. I don't know. Because you've changed so many lives already, you've helped so many people. What do you think a goal is for you going forward with what you're doing?
My goal is to just try and reach as many people as possible. One, to just know that their marriages can be transformed. I mean, a lot of people just think, well, it's just not possible. You don't know our story. You don't know where we've been. And that's true. But I do know I've seen miracle after miracle, not only in my own marriage, but in other marriages that we've worked with. I just never count God out of turning any situation upside down and turning it around. And so I believe that God is in the miracle business. I believe if he had a business card, it would say, I'm in the miracle business. And so I want people to know that and understand that, and never count God out of doing something just supernatural, spectacular, miraculous. If two people are just willing to lay down their pride and allow God to work, he can do anything.
Yeah.
And I just want people to really understand that. And the other thing that I'm super passionate about, like you've already said, is just giving clarity and understanding to this whole issue of brain health, mental health. We all have mental health, all of us. It's just a matter of what state it's in and if it needs help or not, and what we can do to make sure it's at its best and most optimal health, and to let people know that it's okay if there's any illness in there to go and seek treatment if that's what they need to do, and not have any shame about it or any thinking that there's anything wrong with them because that's what they're dealing with. And I'm really passionate about that. So I'm hoping that people will understand that. And I just love being able to come alongside them and for them to go, well, okay, I hear that, and I'm going to be able to do this now and go and see if, seek help, and just to hear their stories and say, oh, I went and he said I need to do this, and maybe it wasn't medication. Maybe I need to do this type of therapy, but then that you can feel like the weight and the heaviness lifted off of them, knowing that they don't have to struggle with that anymore. And it's such a blessing to be able to hear people not having to realize they don't have to struggle with that, or to hear the weight lifted off of them, knowing it wasn't because I wasn't praying hard enough, or because I wasn't reading the right scripture or something like that. There wasn't something wrong with their faith.
Or so even them as a person, right? Yeah. And then also to know that there's people out there who have gone through something similar that you can reach out to, so you don't feel alone. Like it's not just you. And most importantly, to get to that place, because I think it's really hard when you're in that place sometimes to even ask for help, that kind of just festers and becomes its own cancer in its own way. So reaching out and getting support from someone who's been there is so important.
And especially in the church. That's what I'm hoping to try and educate people, because I'm also on the prayer team at our church, and we had this lady put in a prayer request that she was suicidal and was really depressed. And so I asked the prayer team, I said, can I have this person's contact so that I can contact her? And so I sent her an email and said, I've been where you're at, here's my number if you want to call me. So she called me and we had an hour-long conversation. And it turns out that she wasn't even from our church. She just knew of our church. Wow. And she sent that email and she said, I didn't feel I could put this on our own church's prayer list because I didn't want anybody to know what I was dealing with. And I thought, one, that she didn't even feel like there was anybody at her church that she could let know that this is what she was struggling with, number one. And number two, the more that we talked, it turned out that her mother was bipolar, and she had a lot of the same issues, that those ups and downs and all of that. And I said, oh my goodness. I said, please go speak to a psychiatrist and see if that's where you need to get some help. I go, it's okay. I go, the fact that you have that in your own family leads to the fact that may be what you're dealing with.
Right.
And so I followed up with her a week later, and she says, yes, I went, put me on this medication. I feel so much better. But the shame that she was feeling, like she didn't even feel like she could put that on her own church's prayer list.
Right.
And I just thought, that's just so wrong. Right. But somehow we need to make people feel like, we need the church as a whole. I feel like our church in particular does a lot better with this, and I've heard our pastor speak to this, but the church as a whole, I think, just needs to do such a better job of letting people know that there's a place for them.
Yeah. And I think we get tripped up because we have these shoulds in our life that we think we're supposed to be a certain way. And just because someone is a Christian or a faith-based person,
right, exactly,
that they should look differently on the outside. Yeah. But we're all human. We all have our struggles. Yeah. And sometimes it can be even worse because, like we said, we put on our Sunday clothes, we go to church, and we pretend like we've got all got together, just like this woman. And she was afraid to really share who she really is. And I think this is kind of a wake-up call no matter where we are, right? Yeah. People need to step outside of those facades that we think we all, and I've been guilty of that myself. I shared, I think the last time we spoke, we used to argue the most sometimes driving to church, and then you walk in, you take a deep breath, and you're like, oh, hey, everything's fine. I'm fine. We're fine. And, some of the worst. So what a wonderful, wonderful testimony to even what you're doing and the impact you can have. So I'm just so grateful for you. I have a couple more things before we go. Is there anything else that you want to add before we say goodbye here? Is there anything else that you think of that you'd like to share? Did we miss anything?
I don't think we did.
I think we've covered
it. Seems like we went over a bunch of stuff. I don't think so, Terry. Just the fact
Yeah.
that I have three amazing sons and a daughter-in-law and three incredible grandchildren that I just absolutely adore. So,
Mhm.
yeah.
And also so share a fun fact about yourself.
Oh, so Terry knows I'm a very competitive person. Don't like to lose at anything, even cards.
Right.
So, yeah, and I also am a big tennis fan, and I've been fortunate enough to live literally almost a stone's throw from the big major BNP Paribas Open that's here in Indian Wells. And I was fortunate for years to be involved with the ball kids there. Two of my sons were ball kids. And so I worked with the ball kids, and you get to be up close and personal to a lot of the tennis players doing that. So that was super fun thing to do. And Rafa Nadal is my all-time favorite tennis player. And my dog is even named Rafa. So if that gives you any indication how much I like Rafa Nadal. So that's been a very fun thing. And the US Open's going on right now. So we've been watching the US Open. So yeah, I was fortunate enough even to go to the US Open years and years ago. So that was a lot of fun.
That's
So yeah.
awesome. I was going to say, who's your favorite tennis player? I already knew the answer, but that's
Yeah.
awesome. And you're an amazing cook too.
Thank you. I do love
So
to cook. Yeah.
yeah. Well, I just thank you for your time. And it's been such a joy and a pleasure for me to see you. I know you've done the coaching, like I've said, before you've been doing this and you've been doing this with Adam, but now to see you kind of step forward, do this online, really help people. I'm just so proud of you. I'm proud of you for stepping
Thank
forward
you
and
so
launching
much.
this and doing it and find the confidence and the courage to go do it. So you've
Well,
just
that
kind of
has been
opened
a
up.
lot due to you, my friend, and helping me along that way. So thank you so much for all
You're
your help in getting this process going.
You're welcome. But I see that you can help so many people, Annette, and I'm just so grateful. I appreciate your authenticity and just sharing your story. It's not always easy to do that, but to share it so openly in your book. And I like I said, when our secrets keep us sick, I think when we open up and share what we've been through, it gives other people permission to step forward and also
Mm-hmm.
get healing in their life. We can't
Mm-hmm.
heal if we're not honest about where we are.
Right.
And a lot of it for me, I mean, there are church wounds, right? As we learned,
Exactly.
in a seminar that we took, a lot of people feel these scars and these heavy burdens from being in the church because the way they think they're supposed to be, what they're
Right.
hiding. A lot of people hide behind things. And so I think you're a very, very powerful voice to make a difference in many lives. And I just
Hmm.
thank you. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you.
And
It's
I
been
will
my
put,
pleasure.
well, thank you. And I will put everything in the show notes where people can reach out to Annette. But I hope this really blesses people that are listening in. You just have a powerful story and you're just a great human. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Again, as always, thank you so much for being here and for listening in. I hope this blesses your life and you have a few takeaways. Annette will offer a 15-minute free consultation for anyone needing support. I'll put that all here in the show notes. And if you could take a few moments and leave a review, it helps the podcast grow and lets me know that this has blessed your life. Until we meet again, know that you are seen, you are heard, you are loved, you are valued, and you belong. God bless.